You take the data around a pricing example and you really understand the value from the end user's perspective. So you got to have that empathy back in to say what moves their business. And when we understand what moves their business with a few numbers, then you start to give the underpinning for why value pricing matters.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the undeniable relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and I run boot camps to help companies get paid more. Our guest today is Mr. Dan Foster. Here are 3 things you want to know about Dan before we start. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at Telarus. He was Head of Global Sales and Wireless Office for Ericsson. As you run through his whole LinkedIn background, my favorite job he had was he was a VP of Sales for SolarCity at one point in time.
Yeah.
And he is the co-founder of Trek for Autism. Did that 7 years ago and is still part of that organization. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Mark. Great to talk to you.
It's going to be fun. So I always start with the question, how did you get into pricing? So I'm just going to ask it, even though I know you're not in pricing. How did you get into pricing?
Well, it started early. I was in consulting and, when you're writing proposals to Cummins Engine Company or Unilever, you're starting to understand what's the value that they get out of the work that you're doing. And so it inherently gets you to pricing, I guess. But so I guess I've always been part of it, Mark. I really never thought of it that way. It's always been integral to, kind of the job.
Okay. So I'm shocked by what you just said, if you want to know the truth, right? So you're a young kid, you're in consulting, and you're thinking about value. We have salespeople nowadays that are 40, 50 years old and have no idea what value means.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was, I don't know, maybe I can credit a economics professor with, value, quality, price kind of ratios or something like that. But I probably didn't inherently do that. But it was like, hey, in fact, it was my first experience that I think I radically underpriced the proposal when he said, oh yeah, we're ready. I was like, wait, just like that? And I was talking to the CEO of an division of Alcoa. Alcoa bought Alcoa, the aluminum guys. And I remember his name to this day, Chuck. And I was like, boy, I got off the phone. I was like, I might have underpriced that thing.
So I think anytime someone says yes immediately, that happened.
That's what you caught it. Yeah. That's kind of, I guess my question to you would be, what is that kind of visceral or cerebral or even facial reaction in this day and age of video that we should expect when presenting pricing?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know what you should expect, but what I think it should be is first we have a value conversation so that somebody understands what's the value of what it is we're delivering to the customer. And then price just falls into place, right? Oh, I'm going to make you $1 million. 100,000 is nothing.
Right. Yeah. True leverage. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that we would present it without having seen the value.
That's right.
Right. Without having to learn. Well, speaking of which, let's talk about it for a second. Right. So if you're going to teach, you lead a bunch of salespeople now, both direct and indirect, and you've led salespeople historically forever. If you're going to teach salespeople or convince salespeople to sell value, how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with, that product market fit. So, and what you're trying to look for is that dislocation in product market fit. So in our space, for example, and you said it yourself, the ability to go in and show them I can create value. So from maybe a kind of a CAC, a customer acquisition cost perspective, in the classic form, you're willing to spend X to get Y. And so in our space, it's, hey, do you want to have a higher close rate? Do you want to, what we do is we do a lot of enablement of our partners, our downstream, almost like a two-tier distributor, if you will, Mark. And in doing that, what we do is we provide the ability for them to see a higher close rate when they use tools, resources. So I think it alleviates that conversation, and it naturally, it's inherent that there's value pricing there.
Right. And so as long as they see competition and they've got to win deals or not win deals, and you can help them win more deals than they're going to win otherwise, you're now demonstrating to them real value.
That's right.
This is real money in your pocket.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in particular, I mean, you're very familiar with, the subscription-based model, moving away from hardware pricing in our space. So think of SaaS, infrastructure as a service. So, the way people consume cloud nowadays rather than servers, obviously Amazon, Azure, Google. It's critical to think through in a subscription-based model what that value is, because that CAC, that customer acquisition cost, versus the long-term value of a customer, that LTV of a customer, it's a critical ratio to understand when you're thinking through pricing, and then to be able to have your end user, your customer, see that, if you will, that ratio. Obviously they're not going to use the ratio, but as a pricing person, you want to be cognizant of, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So prior to Telarus, did you ever work with sales teams that had to sell to and through distribution channels?
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
So something that I'm really curious about, and I think I don't think Telarus, this doesn't apply to you guys as much, but I'd love to hear your experience from previous roles. And that is, you have to teach your salespeople how to sell value. But if you've got a distribution partner selling your product, don't you need to teach your distribution partner how to sell value?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. We see it in spades with our business currently. When we were really accelerating the Home Depot relationship with SolarCity, that was a two-tier process, although we did have strong enablement capability, really just use them almost, for space, real estate to get acquisition, but everything from, the end shelf to the placement to the messaging had to be there to show value. Why the product is so valuable for that distributor to then push through is kind of the golden goose here.
Yes. So it's actually interesting. Let's talk, just if you don't mind, let's talk about Home Depot and SolarCity, because I love SolarCity. I love the whole business of solar, because it's probably one of the only consumer products we buy where we can and sometimes do use economic value.
Yeah.
Right? How much more money am I going to make or save because I bought solar or didn't buy solar or
That's
bought
right.
an EV? Right? Those are the two that we see it in quite often.
Yeah.
And so now you have to convince Home Depot, how do you sell my product to consumers? Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a few years here, and now they've obviously moved into, they became Tesla Energy. But in that case, when they were leveraging, and we saw others come in through Lowe's, you can see the same thing with SunPower and Sunrun going through the Lowe's relationship. You absolutely needed to have that, the product market fit's clear. You just said it yourself. I'm in there saving you money. In fact, early it was a little bit of the tree huggers. And, my boss, Lyndon, was very clear to say, look, we're here to save money. We're here to teach them how to, whether you're leasing or buying, we're going to save you money. So it's an economic value trade that we're trying to get. And we are trying to extract rents from them, economic rents from them, but at a value point that could be articulated through distribution. So we had multiple distributors. In fact, probably even more interesting is SunPower, our competitor, was purely responsible for enabling their downstream distributors, or I should say partners, installation partners. So it was even more compelling. We had a lot more of a direct. So we had the marketing messaging and the power behind that messaging to then just use that distribution. SunPower was purely beholden to all of the implementers around the country. And so they really had to teach that implementer how to sell, give them the tools, give them a TCO model for the end user. Because you're in the living room, you're literally in the living room. I used to go for the sit, and you'd end up in a living room with one of my salespeople down in SoCal or Arizona, and you got to show them in real time how you're showing true value. Sometimes it'd be out there with a spreadsheet modeling with their power bills. It was pretty intense.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because lately I've been having a conversation frequently with companies about value conversations and the difference between that and an ROI calculator, right? And so I could almost picture a salesperson sitting in the room with a spreadsheet, right? I could almost picture that being an ROI calculator. And the thing I tend not to like about ROI calculators is people tend not to believe them.
That's right. Unless it's your numbers, unless it's like, unless I'm interviewing you, Mark, and saying, well, what's your assumption here? Like if I'm able to put my assumptions into an ROI calculator, I feel a lot better about it.
Yes. And so you think the believability for the solar ROI calculators with a salesperson sitting there and saying, hey, let's go through this. And that was more believable than a normal ROI calculator would be.
Yeah, because it was pretty straightforward. I mean, if you go to where we are today and you look at the ability to believe that you're going to improve your deal close rate with a Telarus engineer on it, which we know we've got data to show, but then I've got to have my partner back to the believability. If I guess there's a coefficient here. Can I get them to believe that their close rate's going to go up between 20 and 40% depending on the product? That's the real question, because the data shows that that's what happens. Can I then get them to believe that they're going to have almost a 50% higher batting average when they've got that coach showing them how to swing the bat?
Nice. And so there's a huge difference when I think about the close rate, and you're going to go sell to your current distributors or resellers, and we think about that close rate. It seems that there's a huge difference in conversation between I want to win a new customer versus I want to keep my current customers, as in resellers.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm a reseller of yours and if I'm a reseller and I've never used you before, you now have to convince me I'm going to get 20 to 40% higher win rates. But if I've been using you for the last 4 years, it's like, well, I would never give this up. Right. Why?
That's right. Yeah. And we think about it very differently. We think about there being, that recruit message. And then for this people that are incumbent, we're the incumbent, it's a little bit of the status quo, reinforce. And it's interesting. You want to reinforce the status quo in that case. The reason why you use Telarus is because you see the increased close rate. You have more tools and capabilities to build a broader pipeline. It's interesting as we just did some research to show that, in some cases there's share shift in an industry. Think of like TD SYNNEX, Ingram Micro. And when we have people come over to us, the downstream suppliers, so maybe like a Zoom or any one of the Five9, let's pick on the contact center, Five9, Nice and Contact, and Genesis, the large three. And then you've got challengers like Zoom and Dialpad, a variety of them. When an advisor comes to us, they're not going to just sell $100. They're going to sell $140 because our enablement function gets them to see more product market fit, and a higher close rate. So it's a really interesting dynamic in that case, Mark.
Yeah. And so one of the things I like to teach people, and I'm curious if you guys are doing this or not, and that is, I call it proven value, which says, hey, here's where you were before you started working with us. Here's where you are now that you are working with us. Do you guys track that, and can you track that, and do you share that back with your customers?
No, we don't do that now because we don't have their data. So it's got to be an implicit thing that the advisor themselves are calculating. So if you think about that model,
Mhm.
it's like, when they move from their current status quo to a new product with Teleris, for example, um, we tried doing that. Yeah, I don't want to date myself with some of the history, but yeah, currently, what I would tell you is it's hard to do that unless you have perfect data on their close rate. They can, and we hear anecdotally that I'm closing more business with you. And the suppliers will tell you, hey, you took, you know, uh, Sally and Harry, who had a low batting average. And when they moved over, their batting average went up because they see deal registrations, they see the close rates. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So how? I love this question because I never know what I'm going to get for an answer. How is AI impacting what you guys are doing right now?
Well, there's a couple venues. First off, it's changing the product mix. So in fact, we were one of the first in our industry to really lean in when people thought it was, just going to be Chat GPT was not even, barely a toddler. And we leaned in. So first off, from a product mix perspective, you're seeing kind of classic substitute, but also bolt on. So it's probably one of the biggest uplifts is that whole area of customer experience where we're seeing AI really have an impact. So I'm going to use that as an example to where AI from a tech advisor. In fact, we do a tech trends report every year in the targeted at CIOs, targeted at VPs of infrastructure, CISOs, et cetera. In this past year, Mark, what happened was it went from a year ago, 13% being interested. So that was right around Chat GPT hitting. People just weren't interested. To now, all the numbers. You read the Wall Street Journal. It was off the charts. In fact, what was really interesting was the percent of technology decision makers saying, I'm cost cutting to save money for innovation in preparation for AI. That
Hmm.
was a really interesting dynamic without running through all the numbers. But then internally, AI can be used for product selection, product capability. We're not at the point now where there's dynamic AI pricing models. I see that kind of in the not too distant future. But in particular with AI, it's exploded the technology advisor's purview into the types of questions they should be asking and products they should be selling.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I have a hard time believing it's going to do too much in pricing in the world of B2B, although it might. I could be totally wrong. But I think what often happens in B2B is that we need to make sure we understand the value we're delivering to our customers, that we can explain it, we can, and then capture more of it. So all of that is us having conversations with our customers. Although I do have to say, and I want all of my competitors and everybody to listen to this, right? When I work with a new client nowadays, I go in and ask ChatGPT all the questions I'm going to ask you anyway.
Yeah.
And I have a great set of answers before I even walk in the door.
Interesting. Yeah, I should be so smart. In fact, is this just an avatar I'm talking to of Mark diving?
It might be, who
Yes,
knows?
yes, that's where we're going, right? But look, I mean, I agree. Like this AI-driven dynamic pricing model to maximize profitability, I don't see that. We're not that much of a commodity business. There is a lot of enablement in the advisor. Let me back up. Because there's complexity, there's margin, right? So margin compression can only go so far when there's complexity because you've got to have resources to deliver. So this idea of marketplaces that are impacting technology purchasing decisions. It's really on a commodity level. Hey, I need EC2, the Amazon, I need a Azure instance. And it's not even AI. It's just kind of a typical value, or I should say, volume-based pricing model.
Yep. The other thing that I think is going to be funny to watch, and I don't hear too many people talk about this. Maybe it's because of who I talk with, but we think about how can we use AI to help us sell our products, to help us communicate value, and whatever, however we want to do that. There's people on the procurement side that are using AI to figure out how to buy products on cheaper prices, right?
Sure.
And so it's going to be a big AI battle eventually.
Sure. But if we see it. So if you want to buy, if you want to buy, a ton of storage and it's a commodity, we get that. That could go through the marketplace earlier than not. If you want a digital transformation, if you want to change your customer experience, if you want to make your business run faster, if you want business process automation and robotic process automation, that's not going through a dynamic pricing model in a marketplace near term. Now, Can I go out and look at like UiPath licensing versus automation anywhere versus, whoever Microsoft scooped up next and look at pricing models? The procurement folks are probably smart to do that.
Yep. And I always seen the stats that say procurement folks get more training than salespeople do.
Yeah.
So
interesting. The buy side, right?
On the buy side.
Yeah.
Yep. So
buyer, seller beware.
We are outmatched. There's no doubt. We do our best. Hey, so can you riff a little bit on the idea of how pricing and packaging go well together in the way you think about the things that we offer and whether that's at your current company or previous company?
Yeah, no, I love the idea of, bundled solutions, whether it's in this space or, we had this, I ran this company, president, CEO of a company called Megapath, and we started doing bundling pricing and switched the value equation around, both from an customer acquisition perspective around this bundled solution and build pricing tiers and volume based on that. But the bundled solution specifically is, I think, fundamental because otherwise, when you offer them the menu-based pricing, oftentimes they don't see the full value. And we see that in our marketplace. Like, hey, if I'm going to charge you X for engineering, as opposed to it being part of the overall partnership, if you will, the product, it's a very different value play because they start to sit there and say, well, maybe I don't need that engineering. I can do that. In reality, that's what you're going to attribute the higher close rate to, the higher attach rate to products. So, I'm sure you think about it a lot, Mark, but the idea of bundled solutions, it works really well in parts of the market and it doesn't work so well in other parts.
And so the bundling, I think bundling goes really well with the concept of selling value, as in, look, I'm trying to sell you a solution that works. Here's what it takes. As opposed to the really price sensitive buyers who are trying to nickel and dime you and saying, look, I can get away with this and this and this. They're not buying based on value. They're just buying based on price.
Yeah. But to your point, until you get reminded of, you have that aha moment on where value is, you tend to want to deconstruct the bundle. And I'll give you an example. We were up skiing this past weekend. Super Bowl was coming on, and the guy had Roku TV, and you can't get to the Super Bowl. And I have a bunch of kids. I got the pressure. I pull up Xfinity, and sure enough, because I can sit there and say, here's my provider, Xfinity, it reminded me of why I'm paying that hellaciously bundled price of $284 a month, because I can get to it through, I then got to a iPad upstairs. I got all this capability around that bundle. And in reality, when I go back to it, I sit there and I say, how can I unbundle that thing? Now, if I were smarter, I probably would have had a Hulu and all this other complexity. But for me, it's a convenience buy, Mark, which is a bundle often, right? A bundle is no need to worry. I've got all things covered. In fact, at Telarus, don't worry, we've got you fully covered. You buy the full bundle of services, everything's covered. Commission reporting all the way through to engineering support.
Yep. Yeah. And what often happens is when we start to deconstruct it, we don't realize what we gave up. And so it's just so much easier to say, look, take care of me. Solve
Yeah.
my problem for me.
Yeah. I bought the full bundle, right? Like I bought it includes oil change.
Now, that kind of goes against my normal thinking when we think good, better, best. I think most people buy the one in the middle, not the
Mhm.
full bundle.
Yeah.
But then again, what happens often in subscriptions is people learn what they really need and they can move up or down the bundles to find that package that just fits what they're after.
Yeah. And I mean, you see it all the time, Mark. It's an art, isn't it? To really figure out which one goes in better, not in best.
Yep. That's exactly right. It is not an easy decision to make.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out where do we put one or the other? Where do we put it? So, Dan, I love talking to you. This is fun. I appreciate it all a lot.
Of course.
But we're going to wrap it up. I want to ask you the final question.
Yeah.
What's one piece of pricing advice you could give our listeners that you think would have a big impact on their business?
Really, I would say we have this saying, that data tells, story sells. But I believe it's both. I believe you take the data around a pricing example and you really understand the value from the end user's perspective. So you got to have that empathy back in to say what moves their business. And when we understand what moves their business with a few numbers, like, hey, if I can increase your close rate by 40%, if I can take your pipeline and grow it by 75%, then you start to give the underpinning for why value pricing matters.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I find it interesting, and maybe your current business is easier in this respect, but I find it interesting that many salespeople don't understand the business of their customers.
Yeah.
And so it's impossible to do value selling if you don't understand how your customers make money.
Yeah. It's interesting because that's one of the challenges I think you face across any industry. We're no different. We've got programs in place to make sure that they start with the, why you first, why it matters for you as an advisor to grow your business. How can I make you more profitable? And if you start with that as a baseline, I think the advisor, because of that empathy, because we are trying to, accelerate their business, either grow it or make it more profitable, then I think it establishes why the incumbency in that case matters, like the status quo, like why, and I'll use the Telarus example, why not switching matters because you get all these benefits, good, better, best. Boy, I don't even need, I'm not sure where I am on that spectrum, but it really feels good. Or I should say it feels best.
Nice. Dan, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
I'm on LinkedIn, Dan Foster. I'm probably too exposed because of all the events we do on LinkedIn, or I'm dfoster@Telarus.com.
Excellent. To our listeners, thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? Tammy T left this review on Amazon for my book, Selling Value, How to Win More Deals at Higher Prices. The emphasis on understanding and delivering real value shifted how I approach sales. It's less about persuasion and more about building trust, making the entire process feel authentic and rewarding. Tammy, thank you. And the check is in the mail. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast, or if your company needs help getting paid more for the value you deliver, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.
Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.